Part two of Father's Day. I wanted to give the rest of this because, well, quite frankly, fatherhood is being attacked in this country. And we've had multiple generations of men that grew up without fathers. You know, I can honestly say I'm one of them. But I think it's really important to highlight this because if a child is not being fathered by someone, that child will go find something, and it's not always a good thing. Well, you saying I'm speaking too softly?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Louder.
All right, I'll speak up louder.
Got old ears here.
All right. So this focus is going to be directly on the fathers. So there was one little boy's definition of Father's Day, and it went like this. Well, it's just like Mother's Day, only you don't spend so much.
True story.
Well, fathers can concede that, you know. A father is someone, there's another quote. A father is someone who carries pictures where his money used to be. And the phone company tells us that calls on Father's Day are not as high in number as calls on Mother's Day, and most of them are collect. Well, it is a privilege of being a father, and the privilege of having loving children. You know, being a father is a special time. It is actually God has wrought in the life of children and to enjoy some of the sweet fruits of His grace in their lives. Being a father is a high priority for men. Not only because for my father and his father, but because of what the Word of God has to say. Unfortunately, that high priority role of the father is being systematically attacked and destroyed in our culture. This particular society in which we live has attacked the male role with such devastating force that I really do believe we have sentenced the next 3 and 4 generations to tragic experiences and of disastrous proportions. Because if one thing is clear in Scripture, it is this: the sins of the fathers are visited upon the 3rd and the 4th generations. What does this mean? Where you have wicked men in leadership, where you have a decline in the father's role, it takes 3 or 4 generations to root out the evil that they produce. We are not looking at a situation where, because of a sinning father, 3 or 4 generations of sons will pay the penalty. Not at all. Ezekiel 18 forbids that in advocating individual responsibility. But what we are seeing is that because fathers lead a nation, a wicked generation of fathers will so impact that nation for 3 or 4 generations that it takes that long to root out their wicked effect. I believe that the legacy of this generation of fathers is tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy in the following generations. In the plan of God, however, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And certainly in the church, we should be following that plan. Whatever may be happening in the society around us, we should be ensuring a righteous generation in the church. We have a responsibility as fathers to our sons, particularly sons who tend to be, for the most part, more rebellious than daughters, because they are the ones given by God leadership, roles, and capacities. If we faithfully teach our sons, they will, by example and precept, lead the women as well. Where you have a plurality in the nation of godly fathers, they will impact the mothers, and where you have godly sons, they will impact the daughters of the next generation. And so, the high priority in Scripture then is that fathers teach their sons and thus raise up a generation of godly leaders. Because God has ordained this, and because God wanted us to be sure that it was followed carefully. God, by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, gave a manual for fathers to use on their sons, a basic resource book. That book is the book of Proverbs. And I want to invite you to actually look at the book of Proverbs. And we're going to be looking at the first 10 chapters of Proverbs in a very general sense. This book is the lesson book on living, from which fathers teach their sons. In fact, that is very apparent. If you look at chapter 1, verse 8, "Hear, my son, your father's instructions." And while at the same time not forsaking your mother's teaching, and you find it again in chapter 2, verse 1, "My son, if you will receive my sayings." Okay? We're going to go to chapter 3, verse 1. "My son, do not forget my teaching." Chapter 4, verse 1. "Hear, O sons, the instructions of a father." And verse 10. "Hear, my son, and accept my sayings." And verse 20. "My son, give attention to my words." Chapter 5, verse 1. "My son, give attention to my wisdom." Proverbs 5:1. In chapter 5, verse 1, "My son, give attention to my wisdom." Chapter 6, verse 1, "My son." Chapter 6, verse 20, "My son, observe the commandment of your father." Chapter 7, verse 1, "My son, keep my words." And so it goes that this entire passage is designed for a father to teach his son. As fathers go, so go nations. So go generations. So goes history. And so God took the principles, the basic principles of spiritual living, and packaged them in the 31 chapters that we call Proverbs. Now, a proverb is very simple. It is a principle stated in concise terms. We could say a proverb is wise in content and concise in form. It is a brief, to the point, pithy statement for the purpose of instruction. Brief, to the point, that they might be remembered. What you have in Proverbs then is a compilation of these concise, wise statements. This then becomes the basic book of truth that fathers use to teach their children, a book of wisdom. And frankly, if fathers are to raise a generation of godly men who will lead the women to godliness, they must teach the truths that are mandated in this father's manual. Frankly, just to depart from that a moment, there's a lot of instruction available today for fathers to teach their sons. Much of it, even in a Christian context, that is pretty much trivial. Much of today's instruction is to be a friend. Listen to your son. Go places with your son. Take him to a ball game. Have fun. Follow his interests, etc. It goes on and on. What Proverbs has to say is much deeper than that. Teach your son trivial things, you'll raise a trivial father who will teach his son trivial things. Teach your son deep things, you'll raise a son who becomes a father who teaches his son deep things. So, the primary duty of a father is not what one little boy said. The primary duty of my dad is to take out the trash. The primary duty of a father is not even to bring home the bacon. The primary duty of a father is not to fix what's broken. The primary duty of a father is to teach holy living to his sons, and of course to his children as well, including the daughters, but primarily the sons. Now, in this process of teaching, there is one compelling, overarching, consummate summary lesson, and that is that we are to teach them wisdom. The word which dominates the Proverbs is the word wisdom. Sometimes the word instruction appears. Sometimes the word understanding appears. Sometimes the word discretion appears. But all of those words are simply elements of wisdom: to know, to understand, to be instructed. To have discretion means to act in wisdom. Wisdom means not simply thought but conduct. It means to live righteously. We are to teach our sons spiritual wisdom is the noblest and greatest and purest pursuit of their life. In chapter 1, verse 20, wisdom is shouting in the streets. Wisdom is personified here. Wisdom is lifting up her voice in the square. She is crying out in verse 22 for people to turn away from being naive, scoffers who are fools, and to turn to wisdom. The call of the whole book of Proverbs is that call, a call to wisdom. In fact, chapter 2, would you please notice, the call by wisdom comes at the end of chapter 1. As wisdom personified cries out for men to come to her. In chapter 2, then we find the father encouraging his son to seek wisdom. Verse 4, if you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasure, then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. The Father is saying, pursue wisdom, pursue wisdom, pursue wisdom. In chapter 8, the whole chapter is about pursuing wisdom, going after wisdom. Verse 11 says, wisdom is better than jewels, and all desirable things cannot compare with her. Again, the pursuit of wisdom. And so the overarching lesson that a father teaches his son is to pursue wisdom. In chapter 10, verse 1, a wise son will make a father glad. A foolish son will be a grief to his mother. Now, we are then, fathers, responsible on this Father's Day to rethink this priority of teaching our sons wisdom. And I would like us to look at these first 10 chapters and just pick and choose the elements that are here that I think make up 10 crucial lessons a faithful father must teach his sons. And I want to tell you, I wasn't a father, but I did have 2 younger brothers that I, mentored and tried to give lessons to. But if I could go back and do it again, I would be giving them advice and wisdom out of Proverbs. If a son learns these 10 things, he will be a blessing to you, and he will be blessed by God. If you want your son to be a blessing to you, to be blessed by God, to bless the culture in which he lives, these are the 10 lessons that you must teach your son. To some of them is spiritual wisdom. This is a listing of the components, of the component parts of spiritual wisdom. Lesson 1, teach your son to fear your God. Fear your God. In chapter 1, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And chapter 9, verse 10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But everything starts with fearing God. Teach your son, fear your God. What do you mean, fear? Well, it has, on the one hand, a positive aspect, a reverential respect, a reverential awe. That means that I have to teach my son about God. I have to teach my son what God is like. I have to teach my son the attributes of God. I have to teach my son that God is powerful, that God is holy, that God is omniscient, omnipresent. I have to teach my son that God is immutable. His nature does not change. That he is just, that he is merciful, that he is kind, that he is loving, gracious, that he is merciful, that he orders providentially all the circumstance of human history and the universe for his own goods, that he is sovereign in a word. I must teach my son to reverence the greatness of God. And then the other side of it is, I must teach my son to fear God's displeasure, to fear God's right to punish, God's right to chasten, God's right to judge. And in that awe of reverencing God's holy character, there is a healthy sense of apprehension, because I know as a holy God, he has a right to punish sin, including mine. If you want to do your son the greatest favor any father could ever do, teach him the character of God. Teach him what God is like on the positive side, all of his attributes. I remember when, watching little ones, I would see, I went to this church when I was in Texas, the First Baptist Church, and I believe his last name was Andrews. Yeah, he was a youth pastor, and he used to pick us up in buses, and he had a book called Leading Little Ones to God, which taught the attributes of God. While on our ride to Sunday school, he would have this book and he'd be reading to all the kids. Basically teachings of Proverbs. But it was a child's book called Leading Little Ones to God. And basically what he was doing is that he was emphasizing the attributes, which they must know who their God is, and they must learn to worship their God. That's part of fearing him. Teach your sons to worship. And you teach not only by what you say, but by what you do. And on that bus ride on the way to Sunday school, he would always teach us to fear God, because he knows everything. He would also say, you lie, you fry. He had no problem talking about fire and brimstone. He had no problem. Just put the fear of God in these kids. That's Baptist church.
That's not what it
You're nothing.
I know. Okay. Do you worship faithfully on the Lord's day? Are you consistent and faithful in worshiping the Lord? Are you here at the opening of the day in the morning and the closing in the evening service? Are you faithful to worship God in the Word yourself personally? Does your son look at you and see a true worshiper? Because whatever patterns of worship you have established for yourself, you have established for your son. And he will likely establish for his son. What kind of legacy are you leaving? And what about living in a healthy fear of God's holy right to punish sin? Do you have that healthy fear? Do you understand that God has the right to punish you? Do you so live to avoid that? Notice in chapter 3 of Proverbs, verse 5. This is really a description of a worshiping heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. The point being that if I am completely focused on God, he's going to guard my life. He's going to straighten my path. I want to teach my son to trust the Lord with all of his heart. The word trust in the Hebrew originally meant to lie helplessly face down, and there's a sense of humility there. But there's also a sense of submission there to the total sovereign control of God, in which the worshiper says, I not only am humbled in your presence, but I bow in your presence submissively to anything that you would choose to do. That's how much I trust you. Teach your son to trust that way. Teach him not to lean on his own understanding. The Hebrew word does not mean to incline. It means to support yourself. Teach him not to support himself by his own wisdom, but to support himself by God's wisdom. In all your ways, acknowledge him. The word there means to be aware of, to know, to have fellowship with in everything in life. Teach him to do it in union, communion with the living God. Teach him how to trust God for everything, how to lean on God for support totally, and how to be aware of God's consistent presence in life. And if he so lives with that kind of trust and that kind of leaning and that kind of acknowledging, God's going to direct his path. Teach him to fear his God. And I believe that when God is feared, so is sin. Proverbs says, fearing the Lord prolongs life. You want to give your son that kind of rich, full life? Proverbs says, fearing the Lord is more profitable than wealth. It brings life. It keeps one from evil. It results in riches and honor, and it breeds humility. Proverbs says that those who fear God sleep satisfied and are untouched by evil. They have confidence, they will be praised, and they have their prayers answered. Would you like that for your son? Mm-hmm. Would you like to know that your son will have his life prolonged to its fullness? Would you like to know that he will be kept from evil, that he will be brought honor and riches, that he would be humble, untouched by evil, satisfied, confident, praised, and have his prayers answered? Then teach him to fear God. This is the most crucial lesson a father could ever teach a son. Lesson number 2, son, not only fear your God, but guard your mind. Guard your mind. Chapter 3, verse 3, among many, introduces the heart here. And the writer mentions kindness. That beautiful word that means love, loyalty, faithfulness, fidelity, kindness. And then the word which means truth or accuracy, reliability or dependability. take those two marvelous things, loyalty, faithfulness, fidelity, and all of that, along with reliable, dependable, accurate truth, and bind them around your neck and write them on the tablet of your heart. Chisel them as it would be in the stone of your mind. Heart has reference to mind, the seat of thought and emotion and will. In other words, teach your son to guard his mind. You are responsible as a father for the mind of your child. Boy, what a tremendous responsibility. When the assault on the human mind is at such a level as it is today, through the media, the job of guarding the mind of your young person and teaching him how to guard it is indeed a formidable task. Chapter 4, you notice verse 23. Watch over your heart with all diligence, the father says to his son, for from it flows the springs of life. Guard your mind diligently, because everything in life comes out of it. Out of it comes your conduct. It's not what goes into a man, Jesus said in Matthew. It's what comes out of a man that defiles him. And so what goes in is not the issue. What starts in and comes out is. And so the heart must be right. The father then has the task of assuring the son's mind is programmed with truth, with virtue, with faithfulness, with honesty, integrity, loyalty, love, with all that those two words in chapter 3 can sum up. Father, you have a responsibility to teach your son to guard his mind all the way through this passage. And I wish we had time to just kind of wander through the 10 chapters, but you see this. Back in verse 9, chapter 1, he talks about the fact that good instruction is a graceful wreath to your head and ornaments around your neck. When a son hears the truth in his heart, it graces him. In chapter 2, verse 10, he wants wisdom to enter your heart and knowledge, be pleasant to your soul, so that discretion will guard you, and understanding will watch over you, to deliver you from the way of evil. In chapter 3, verse 1, let your heart keep my commandments. Chapter 4, verse 4, let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. And that is the issue, that the mind or the heart, as it's called, be guarded carefully. Okay. Father, you are the guardian of your child's mind. You must keep the right stuff going in and the wrong stuff going out. That is your duty before God, to guard your son's mind, your children as well. What a tremendous responsibility we have. That means we have to protect our children from what they are exposed to. Mm-hmm. That's the negative. The positive, we must make sure that they exposed to what we want to fill their mind. Therein lies the benefit of a godly education, of Christian training, of exposure to the teaching of the Word of God. That is the duty of the father. Teach your son, fear your God, son, and guard your mind, for out of it comes your conduct. Third great lesson, a father must teach his son, obey your parents. Obey your parents. All through this entire section, these statements about, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction," are repeated. Chapter 1, verse 8, chapter 2, verse 1, 3, verse 1, 4, verse 1, and then again in chapter 4, it's repeated again and again. Look at verse 10. Hear, my son, accept my sayings. Verse 11. I have directed you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in upright paths. Do what I say, is what he's saying. In verse 20. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart or your mind. We're reinforcing here the first command with promise, which is, children, obey your parents in the Lord. That's the first command with promise. Teach your sons to obey what you say. Now, that means discipline is not the enemy of enthusiasm. Let's go back to chapter 3, verse 11. My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord, nor loathe his reproof. For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father the son in whom he delights. If you love your son, you discipline him. You reprove him. You rebuke him. Here is discipline. And if we are to have dutiful, faithful sons who carry on a righteous pattern, they must learn to obey their parents, and discipline is a part of that. In chapter 10, verse 13, a rod is for the back of him who lacks understanding. That means put the paddle to his behind.
Exactly.
When your son doesn't do what you want him to do, you use a rod. Yeah, I said it. Later on in Proverbs, it says he has rebellion in his heart. Drive it far from him with the rod. Not talking it out. This is discipline, not done in anger, but done in love. Whom the Father loves, he disciplines. And this discipline is done for the purpose of conforming your son to wisdom, for the purpose of breaking self-will, for the purpose of removing foolishness, for the purpose of delivering the child from spiritual death, and for the purpose of making him a delight to his parents. All of those things are taught in Proverbs. Teach your children to obey, and use a rod to reinforce, because God says physical punishment done in love is a strong corrective. That way, your children learn to obey their parents. I say that out there in the public square. They'll think I'm an extremist. You know. And we wonder why we have out of control crime.
Yeah.
And if they learn to obey their parents, and their parents are advocating the law of God, they will learn to obey the law of God. And if they learn to obey their parents, they will learn to submit to the parents' authority. And later on, when they're living in society, they will learn to submit to societal authority in any form. A disobedient child, you see, makes not only a spiritual disaster, but an antisocial personality. And very often, a criminal adult. You have a task, Father, to say to your son, bless you. You must learn to fear your God, guard your mind, and obey your parents. You must learn how to submit to authority. And since we represent the authority of God and are teaching you the wisdom of God, you must obey. You must obey. I do not believe there's any excuse for a rebellious child. I believe that children can be under control if they're properly taught by their fathers to obey. There's a fourth principle, and this must be taught as well, and very, very important. A father must teach his son, select your companions. Select your companions. You get on the offensive. A father has the responsibility to teach his children how to choose their friends. What did the Apostle Paul say? Bad company corrupts what? Good morals. Bad company corrupts good morals. Your children, believe me, cannot rise above their acquaintances. Rarely does a child have the capability to elevate himself beyond the constituent group in which he functions. You have to select and help him learn to select companions and not let them select him. If we go back to chapter 1 for a moment, I'll give you an illustration of it. Verse 10, father would say to his son, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. In other words, don't get sucked into the gang. If they say, and they appeal on the basis of excitement and adventure and a thrill, if they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, even whole, as those who go down to the pit. Let's kill somebody, and we'll find all kinds of precious wealth and fill our houses with gold. Throw in your lot with us, and we'll all have one purse. Here's the gang appealing to the kid, and the gang comes along and sucks up one other person for their own wicked purposes. It's amazing, isn't it, this kind of action? For one fleeting moment of pleasure, wicked men are willing to take a life or inflict lifelong trauma on someone pointless, senseless, gang violence. Like those members of that gang that shot Stacy Lim with a .357 Magnum because they wanted to take the wheels off her car. It's an unthinkable thing that people will do for a thrill. And they want to suck the innocent and the naive and the unwitting into that. Think about that little boy weeks ago in the news who wouldn't take dope with his friends in New York City, so they set him on fire. Did you hear about that? It was in the news. The enticements can be pretty strong. Fathers, we have a tremendous task. You may not live in an inner city ghetto like New York or East Los Angeles, but I'll tell you what, there's tremendous peer pressure coming upon your sons to conform to a standard of conduct that is the standard of conduct of the people around them. You must teach them to select their companions and not be selected and then intimidated into that kind of alliance. Teach your son how to fight, because he's going to have to.
Did it kill him? Was he rescued or?
I just momentarily read that headline. I didn't want to dig into it. It just disturbed me. But that's what's going on out there. The whole appeal here is to the father to fulfill his responsibility. In chapter 2, verse 11, the father has to teach his son how to be delivered from the way of evil, from the man who speaks perverse things. You don't want to be around those kind of people. From those who leave the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, you want to make sure your children aren't around those kind of people who delight in doing evil and rejoice in the perversity of evil, whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. Don't let your sons around those kind of people. You instruct them how to choose their companions, those who lift them up. Proverbs 18:24 is kind of an interesting verse, just jumping outside of our 10 chapter fence a little bit. Proverbs 18:24 at first reading looks a little hard to understand in English. A man of many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. It's kind of an interesting verse in the Hebrew. It says, a man of Rhea comes to ruin, but there is a head who sticks closer than a brother. It's two different words for friend. A man who just wants a lot of acquaintances, who wants to be everybody's buddy, is going to be in trouble. Better you should have a deep friend, an ahed, a loving friend who is loyal and honest and uplifting and holds you accountable, who lifts you up. Better a few of the right kind of friendships than a lot of the wrong kind. Fathers, you have the responsibility to God for the process of your children learning how to choose their companions. This is a father's duty. Son, fear your God, guard your mind, obey your parents, select your companions. Fifth, the big one, control your body. Any witting father who has any sense at all realizes that young men are going to develop passions that can lead them into tragedy upon tragedy unless they learn how to control their body, their bodily desires. And as you get into this section, this is the dominant theme throughout these first few chapters of Proverbs. We go to chapter 2 for a moment, verse 16. This is repeated, and we don't have time to go through all of it, but I will give you a little sense of what the writer's saying in 2:16. He's talking about wisdom and wisdom alone. That is the wisdom of God. Spiritual wisdom that a father is supposed to teach his son is able to deliver you from the strange woman. Well, what does the word strange mean? Foreign.
In my Bible it says immoral.
Yeah. Why do you have to worry about a foreign woman? Because she's away from home. Well, what does that mean? Well, she's away from her husband. She's away from her family. She's away from her friends. She's away from accountability. And so being she's the out-of-town woman, if you will, and it's real easy for her to act any way she wants because the constraints are off. You beware of the roaming woman who is away from the point of her responsibility. Beware of the adulteress who flatters with her words, that leaves the companion of her youth, that's her husband, and forgets the covenant of her God, that's her marriage vow. Beware of her, because her house sinks down to death and her tracks lead to the dead. Why? Because adultery by biblical prescription requires the death penalty. She'll bring you to death. Some think that this is a reference also to a venereal disease, or even to the divine intervention of God in an act of punishment. But I think the primary issue here is way back in Deuteronomy chapter 22, where God says people who commit adultery are to be executed. Passion is as strong as it is. However, as evidenced by the fact that men who would know they would have perhaps to lose their life would still follow their passion. At that moment, at the moment in time, lust for sex outweighs the desire to live. Stay away. Teach your son sexual self-control. Father, so he doesn't destroy his life and destroy his family. Chapter 5, verse 1. My son, give attention to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion, that your lips may reserve knowledge. Here's a very important lesson for the son. The lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. Her kisses are sweet, and she's going to sweet talk you. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lay hold of Sheol. She doesn't ponder the path of life. Her ways are unstable. She doesn't know it. And now then, my sons, listen to me, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, and don't go near the door of her house. And don't give your vigor to others. That is, don't procreate through others. Don't give your years to the cruel one, and let strangers be filled with your strength, and your hard-earned goods go the house of an alien. Don't have to support the children of some woman that isn't even in your home. Well, King Solomon's deep.
Yeah.
Don't give away your seed to someone else. Don't create children through someone else. Don't give your strength to another family and have to spend the rest of your life paying some kind of alimony or whatever. In the end, your flesh and body are consumed. You'll say, how I have hated instruction, and my heart spurned reproof. And I haven't listened to the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to my instructors. Someday you're going to say, I wish I would have done what my dad told me. Teach your son sexual purity. Chapter 6 takes it further, verse 20. And all the way down to the end, pick it up to in verse 24. Wisdom is given to you to keep you from the evil woman, the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Don't desire her beauty in your heart. Don't let her catch you with her eyelids. For on account of a harlot, one is reduced to a loaf of bread. She'll turn you into nothing quick. An adulteress hunts for the precious life. There you are. This precious life, she just wants to hunt you. Can you take fire in your bosom and your clothes not be burned? Can you walk on hot coals and your feet not be scorched? So is the one who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her will not go unpunished. It's going to cost you, and it's going to cost you dearly. Verse 32, anyone who commits adultery with a woman is lacking sense. He who would destroy himself does it. Why do people do that? Wounds and disgrace he will find, and his reproach will not be blotted out. Let me tell you, an adulterer has a reproach not blotted out. You know, that's a good thing to keep in mind when you remember that it says in 1 Timothy chapter 3, of course you forgot to put it in there, okay. That one who is an elder must be above reproach. If an elder or a pastor falls into sexual sin and adultery, this text says that reproach will not be blotted out. And once you bear that reproach and that stigma, it appears to be a permanent one, a permanent disqualification. That's a heavy price to pay. One well-known pastor just paid the price not too long ago.
More than one.
Yeah. Chapter 7, the whole chapter is devoted to a fascinating scenario we can pick up in verse 6. Here's the victim. This harebrained, feather-headed, naive guy wanders into temptation. He's in a part of town he shouldn't be in. She's at the window of the house, looking out through the window. I saw among the naive, I discerned among the youths a young man lacking sense, just the kind she likes, who was passing through the streets near her corner. and he takes the way to her house. He knows what he's doing. He's down in a part of the city he has no business being in. He's roaming around in his stupidity, not knowing what he's going to get into. That's the victim. The hunt starts in verse 10. There he is, in the twilight, in the evening, in the middle of the night. And she comes, verse 10, she comes to meet him, dressed as a harlot, cunning of heart, boisterous, rebellious. Her feet do not remain at home. She is now in the streets, now in the squares, and lurks by every corner. That's the hunt. The tactics. Look at how she goes after this guy. Verse 13, this is what's known as the direct approach. She seizes him and kisses him. Whoa. I remember walking through, this was before I met you, okay? I remember when I was stationed in Germany, and I was just walking down the street, with my battle buddies, not realizing that it was a red light district, and a harlot grabbed my arm. And I literally just kept walking, and she kept yanking, insisting that I go with her. And then my squad leader got in the middle, Sergeant Collins, and said, "Oh my God, get the you-know-what out of here." Safety in numbers. But it was aggressive. Nothing new. They've done it that way before, I guess. But you gotta be careful, and you gotta have common sense of knowing where you're going.
Yeah.
Verse 14, she gives him this business. I was due to offer peace offerings. Today I paid my vows. In other words, help me celebrate. This is a big religious day for me. So will you come and help me with my religious celebration? And then comes flattery in verse 15. Oh, therefore, I have come out to meet you, to seek your presence earnestly, and you're just the guy I was looking for. Sure, just the one I sought. Then the sensual seduction. I spread my couch with the coverings with colored linen of Egypt, sprinkled my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us drink our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with caresses. This is sensual seduction. And then she gives him the safety pitch. Verse 19, the man is not at home. He's on a long journey. He's taken a bag of money with him. At full moon, he'll come home. In other words, he's got so much money because he's got so much business to do. And he's going to be there a while. You've got nothing to worry about. And after all of those attempts, she finally tries to kill him with the words, verse 21. With her many persuasions, she entices him. With her flattering lips, she seduces him. She talks him to death. Just talk, talk. Keep the seduction going. Then comes the kill. Suddenly he follows her. The naive guy, as an ox to the slaughter, and one in chains to the discipline of a fool, until an arrow pierces through his liver as a bird hastens to the snare, so he doesn't know that it will cost him his life. The end of the verse 27 says he goes into the chambers of death. Teach your son that. Teach your son sexual purity. Teach your son to control his body. Chapter 9, verses 13 to 18 go further through that scenario, a woman of folly who wants to lead you to the grave. Sure, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant, but it'll kill you. Teach your son, keep mentally away. Don't go to certain places in town. Don't get caught in certain comprising situations. Keep your hands to yourself. Stay away from women like that. Guard your feet. Guard your eyes. Guard your ears. Teach your son that. Control his body for purity, and he'll be a delight to you and blessed by God. there's a flip side of that. You say, well, if you teach him that too strong, and then when he gets married, he won't appreciate the joys of marital sex. You ever hear that one?
Say that again.
The flip side is, well, if you teach him that too strong, to stay away from sexual immorality, and then when he gets married, he won't appreciate the joys of marital sex.
I think you might appreciate it more.
So you have to balance it. I've heard that argument.
Yep.
It's a common humanistic argument. Well, he has to experience to so he can be, a silly argument. Point number 6. Teach him, son, enjoy your wife. I hug my wife every moment I can get. Sometimes she gets tired of it. She could be walking to the kitchen and just grab her. While it is forbidden prior to marriage, it is exalted afterwards. If we go back to chapter 5, this is so beautiful the way it's articulated. Verse 15 says, drink water from your own cistern. And this is following on the passage about the harlot. Drink water from your own cistern and fresh water from your own well. When you're thirsty, find your satisfaction with your own wife. That's what it means. When you're physically thirsty, find your satisfaction from your own wife. Drink water from your own cistern and from your own well. Should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets? One of the things that people wouldn't want to see in that particular part of the world in ancient times was just water flowing through the street. Nobody in their right mind would just take buckets of water and throw them across the street. Just throw them down the pavement or the dirt. Because during those times, water was very precious. And not only that, there wasn't much of it. It was hard to get at it, to get to the water. It was hard. And nobody was going to just be wasting water. And he uses that as an analogy. As people would be considered foolish who just threw water in the streets, you are considered an absolute fool if you just go out in the street and spread your stream everywhere and produce babies by other people. Don't do that. A fool would do that. Foolish and wasteful is a man who fathers children all over town, all over the street. Let them be yours alone. He says, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain, your procreative capacity to be blessed. And here it is. And rejoice in the wife of your youth, as a loving hind and a graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. For why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? And he reminds him in verse 21 that God is watching and sees everything. Enjoy your wife. Be exhilarated with her love. Let her breast satisfy you at all times. Rejoice in her. Teach your son that. Teach your son by the way you treat your wife and by the things you say, to be totally fulfilled in his own marriage. Teach him what Proverbs says, that a wife is a gift from God, more precious than jewels. Teach him that a wife is given to be his best friend and companion, that a wife is to serve his needs and that of the children, and she is to be rewarded for her efforts and praised, as Proverbs 31 says. Teach him the beauty and the wonder and the blessedness of a gift of a wife, and teach him to enjoy his wife, and you will teach him best if you enjoy yours. The wise father, what is he doing? He's saying to his son, fear your God, guard your mind, obey your parents, select your companions, control your body, enjoy your wife. Those are the key lessons. Let me give you just a few more. Number 7, watch your words. Teach your son to be careful how he speaks. Chapter 4, verse 24, my son, he says in verse 20, down in verse 24, he adds, put away from you a deceitful mouth. Put devious lips far from you. Make sure you don't speak lies. Make sure you don't speak hypocritically. Make sure you don't speak perversely. Make sure you don't speak deceitfully. Speak pure, true words. Certainly, one of the things that I grew up with was that lesson. I'm about as far away from using any curse word or one remotely related to a curse word as any human being in the earth, because I had my mouth washed out numerous times for words I didn't even understand or pronounce correctly. I never had soap in my mouth, but I've had a hand across it. Watch your mouth. My mother used, there are mothers that used to wash out their kids with mouths with soap. If a kid came home and said, "Daddy, what does blank mean?" In went the soap. What that kid had was called aversion therapy. We have passed that on to our children, so that what comes out of their mouth is the word, hopefully, of the righteous. Proverbs says, the lips of the righteous speak wisely. The lips of the righteous are a fountain of life and a tree of life. The lips of the righteous are like choice silver. They're satisfying. They feed others. They bring healing and deliverance. They are patient, kind, wise, truthful, honest, pure, soft, gentle, slow to anger, and are mouthpieces for the Lord. Teach your son to watch his words. In chapter 5, verse 2, your lips may reserve knowledge. Chapter 6, verse 12, stay away from the one who walks with a false mouth. Chapter 10 is magnificent. Look at verse 11. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life. That's a great statement. Verse 13. On the lips of the discerning, wisdom is found. Verse 14. The mouth of the foolish, ruins is at hand. Quite a contrast. In verse 18, you forgot 18? Okay, well. In verse 18 says, he who conceals hatred has lying lips. He who spreads slander is a fool. Don't do that. Don't lie. Don't slander. That's another thing we taught, you have to teach the children is to never lie. So teach the children to speak truth. Here's verse 19. In verse 19, when there are many words, transgression is unavoidable. Teach them not to always talk. He who restrains his lips is wise. The tongue of the righteous is as choice silver. It just goes on like this. Teach them to watch their words, to watch their words. That's a major matter of wisdom. The mouths of the fools pour out endless speech, crooked speech, foolish speech, violent speech, hateful speech, malicious speech, strife, ruin, slander, belittlement, gossip, disgrace, scorching fire, mischief, perversity, and on, it says in Proverbs. Fathers, teach your children to watch their words. Number 8, teach your sons, son, pursue your work. Teach your boys how to work. Father, by word and example, look at the ant. he says in chapter 6. He's giving this lesson to his son. Son, go to the ant. In verse 6, chapter 6. And look at this ant. Observe her ways and be wise, which, having no chief, officer, or ruler, the first thing you want to do is teach your children how to work without a boss around. Even an ant does that. Now, your children will work if you stand there with a whip, but the issue is, will they if you won't? Because they're going to have to in life. And they also need to be taught how to plan ahead. The ant even knows to prepare her food in the summer, anticipating the coming winter. She gathers her provision in the harvest. Teach them to work. How long will you lie down, O lazy son? When will you arise from your sleep? Get your children up. And they'll say, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, sure, and your poverty will come in like a vagabond, and your need like an armed man. You're going to make yourself poor if you don't learn how to work. Teach them to pursue work. A sluggard is a lazy man. He's just an ordinary man, really, with too many excuses, too many refusals, too many postponements. According to Proverbs, the lazy man will suffer hunger, poverty, failure. Why? Because he sleeps through the harvest. He wants, but he won't work. He loves sleep, is glued to his bed, and will follow worthless pursuits, trying to get rich quick. On the other hand, the man who pursues his work earns a good living, has plenty of food, is rewarded for his effort, and earns respect even before kings. It says in chapter 22, verse 29, teach your sons to pursue their work, so very important. Chapter 10, verse 4, poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. Teach your son to work and to plan ahead in his work. Now that he's working, there's a ninth lesson he needs to learn. Here's another one. Son, manage your money. Go back to chapter 3 for a moment. And among these repeated lessons is this one. And there are some basic principles that I would draw to your attention. Verse 9. Here's principle number 1 with money. Honor the Lord with your wealth and from the first of all your produce. So your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. In other words, if you are generous with God, He will be generous with you. So honor the Lord with your money. Teach Him how to manage His money. Lesson number 1 is to give from the top, from the first fruits to the Lord. All of the money is to honor the Lord. He's to use all his money to honor the Lord. All of it. Teach him how to give. If you're a mediocre giver, if you're just a part-time giver, that's what he'll be. And as you have forfeited the promised blessing of God, so will he. And so you sentence your son to a lifetime of the kind of thing that you've had. If you want your son to know the fullness of the blessing of God and all of it poured out on him, then teach your son how to give God generously. You see, what we do as fathers is simply produce the next generation. And it either moves up or it moves down. The positive thing, teach him to honor the Lord with all his money, and whatever he does with it is to honor the Lord. Now, let me flip that over. There's a negative thing too. chapter 6, verse 1. And this is a very good lesson. And there's much more here than initially meets the eye. Verse 1 says, if you have become surety for your neighbor, have given a pledge for a stranger. Now listen, if you've co-signed, now the Bible says you should never do that for a stranger. Don't co-sign for a stranger. You say, why would anybody in their right mind co-sign with a stranger? I'll tell you. You know what it means? It means that some stranger came along and told you if you gave them this money or if you sign on for this debt, in the end, you would become what?
Liable.
Rich.
They said that, you become liable.
That's the whole bottom line.
Become their sponsor.
In other words, if you'll just put your resources behind my project, in the end, you're going to be rich. The schemers looking for investors. I mean, how many times have you heard that story?
Pyramid groups.
Yep. And how much money have you lost believing it? When a stranger comes and says, just put your money behind this, what you have done now is you have yielded up the stewardship of your own money to a person for whom you cannot be accountable. So you have literally released your God-given stewardship. Teach your son not to do that. Teach your son that God has given him his resources for him to use wisely as a steward of God. Not to become liable for another person whose behavior he cannot control. In other words, make very wise investments and make sure you control. Don't co-sign for a stranger. So that on his default, you become liable. That's the point. Why? Because you are given money as a steward of God, and you must use it at your discretion as the Lord leads. You have it snatched out of your hand by the discretion of someone else. You understand? Control your money to honor the Lord, and don't get involved in get-rich-quick schemes that are going to put you in a position of liability. And if you get caught, look how he says to deal with it. Verse 2. If you've been trapped because you made some promise with your mouth, then do this, son. Deliver yourself. Get out of it. Go humble yourself and importune your neighbor. You know what to do. You get down on your face, on your knees, you humble yourself, and you beg and you negotiate a settlement. You do it immediately. You get that thing off your back so that it doesn't go on and on and on. Settle it, get it done, humble yourself. Don't even give sleep to your eyes. Don't give slumber to your eyelids until you get yourself out. Until, like a gazelle from a hunter's hand or a bird from the hand of a fowler, get out of that mess. Get it settled. Humble yourself. Plead for mercy. And do whatever you can to get out of it, so you are not continually under the bondage of being liable for someone else's conduct. Teach your sons that. One final lesson. Son, love your neighbor. When we say you don't co-sign for a stranger, we don't mean you don't give money to someone in need. No. Chapter 3, verse 27. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. If you got the money, give it. If you got the goods, give them to the person in need.
That's hard to discern sometimes.
It is.
It is.
Generosity to the poor, meeting the needs of people around you when you have the resources, is a part of honoring God. You're to be generous in showing sacrificial love to your neighbor. Verse 28. It says, go, come back, and tomorrow I'll give it. Don't do that. If you got it in your pocket, give it. If you have it, give it. Don't tell him to come back. He has a need. You give the need. If you have it with you, don't send him away and have him come back Another thing about your neighbor while you're loving him, don't devise harm against your neighbor when he lives in security beside you. He feels well-being beside you, and you've got some plot going on where you're going to get back at him in retaliation for something he did. Or where you're going to confiscate the corner of his property, or you're going to do something to cut off his water, or whatever it is. Don't do anything that is going to harm your neighbor. Don't contend with your neighbor. In verse 30, without any reason, if he's done you no harm. Don't be vengeful. In verse 31. Don't have vengeance toward a neighbor. Don't envy people who resolve all issues with violence and say, boy, I wish I could. If I had my way, I'd cut him up. Don't be vengeful. Don't choose any of the ways of violent men. The curse of the Lord is on those kind of people. So take care of your neighbor. Love him. Live with him in peace. Forgive him. Meet his needs. Those are the rules. And verse 35 says you'll inherit honor. Honor. Well, such is the duty of a father. And I close with this. Listen carefully. You have this duty as a father, and I want to lay it as clear as I can at your feet. If you fail, Father, to teach your son to fear God, the devil will teach him to hate God. If you fail to teach your son to guard his mind, the devil will gladly teach him to have an open mind. If you fail to teach your son to obey his parents, the devil will teach him to rebel and break his parents' heart. If you fail to teach your son to select his companions, the devil will gladly choose them for him. If you fail to teach your son to control his body, the devil will teach him to give it over completely to lust. If you fail to teach your son to enjoy the marriage partner that God has given him, the devil will teach him to destroy the marriage. If you fail to teach your son to watch his words, the devil will fill his mouth with filth. If you fail to teach your son to pursue his work, the devil will make his laziness a tool of hell. If you fail to teach your son to manage his money, the devil will teach him to waste it on riotous living. And if you fail to teach your son to love his neighbor, the devil will gladly teach him to love only himself. We have a great responsibility to this generation and the next as fathers. I'm going to close with prayer here. Lord, we thank you for this time and in worship and the word. I would pray for all here who are fathers that we might be faithful to teach what we should teach our sons, to all our children, that we might be instruments of your grace to bring about a godly seed in the next generation. In Jesus' name, amen. And that's all, folks. Happy Father's Day. That was one of my favorite cartoons. The drunk stork.